Now, can you hear me? So I will continue. So this is the Shaka family tree. Now, when I show you this Shaka family tree, maybe it's easier to explain it like this. Jayasena, this is a Prince Siddhartha, right? And so these are Siddhartha and his cousins. And this is the father, Shuddhodana, and his generation. So this is the generation of King Shuddhodana, the generation of but the Buddha's father. And then the king Simhasanu is the father of the Buddha's father, Shuddhodana. So he's the father of the Buddha's father. And then Jayasena is Simhahanu's father. So he was the king. So Jayasena was the king of Kapilavastu, and he had two children, the son Simhamanu and the daughter Yashodhara, the same name as the Buddha's wife, but there's a different person. So they were brother and sister. So King Simhahanu had, how many sons did he have? He had 4 sons. So these are the 4. And then 1 daughter named Amrita. So there were 5 siblings. Now, each of the 5 siblings had their own sons, and so Shuddhodana had 2 sons. So the elder son was Siddhartha, that's the Buddha, and the younger one was Nagawa, was named Nanda. And so in this way, Shuddhodana's brothers also had their own children. And we also have Yashodhara. This is there's a younger sister of King Simhahanu. So Yashodhara there was another city called Devadaha. And so she married into the royal family of Devadaha, and Yashodhara had 1 son and 2 daughters. The one son was called the Shakya Suprabuddha. So one of these was Maya, and the other was Prajapati. No, so there's the three children. Among one of them was Shaka Suprabuddha, and he also had one son and a daughter. And so his son was named Devadatta. And so when I said that there are two Devadatis, that is the reason why. So one Devadatta was the son of the ruler of the city of Devadaha, the Shaka Suprabuddha, and his daughter was called Yashodhara. So she was the second Yashodhara, and the second Yashodhara. So the Buddha, when he was young, was called Siddhartha. So she was married to the Yashodhara, the daughter of the earlier Yashodhara. So this is basically, to explain in brief, this is how it happens. Now, if I explain it in detail, it's very complicated, but I don't need to speak about that all. So what some sutras say is that Maya and Mahaprajata are both Suprabuddhi's daughters. There's Suprabhuddhi, as I said, so Yashodhara, and so in another sutra they are said to be Suprabuddhi's daughter. Likewise, the king. And now explained that she was. That the Buddha's wife Yashodhara was the daughter of Suprabhuddha. But others said that he is the daughter of a minister named Shakyanama. And so there are many different explanations, but we don't have time to speak about them all right now. So in brief, the most important is that the Buddha's father's name is that something we have to remember. His father's name is Shuddhadana. So he was Shuddhadana, and at that time he was the ruler or the king of the Shakyan ethnic group. And his mother was named Mahamaya or Maya. She's called Mahamaya. This is the mother of the Buddha. However, but the mother's Buddha died 7 days after the Buddha was born. You've probably all heard this. 7 days after the Buddha was born, his mother passed away. And when she passed away, the Buddhists would ask, what is the reason why she passed away? And there are many different explanations of that. Now, among the different explanations, to give a representative one way of explaining is that there's a reason why the Buddha's mother passed away. The reason is that the Buddha's mother had continued to live so later the Buddha would leave and renounce the kingdom and go off and go through ascendants. Now, if his mother had seen it, then the mother would have such love for her son that there would be a danger that she would have had a heart attack. And so that is the reason why she passed away, they say. This is a kind of nice little explanation, isn't it? But this is only an explanation given by later people. But if I look at it, and this is just my own thought, my own opinion, the time when the Buddha was born, at that time, King Shuddhadana was very, very young. And Mahamaya was also very old. Excuse me, King Shuddhadana was very old, and so Mahamaya was also very old. And so even these days, when you're older, if you have children, it's a great danger, even in the modern age. So in those days, there was not as similar health circumstances as we have these days. So after she gave birth, she had some health problem, and because of that, she passed away. I think that's what I think, but that's just my opinion. But I don't have any text or any manuscript as a source for this. So in brief, 7 days after the Buddha passed away, 7 days after the Buddha was born, his mother was passed away. And so he also had his aunt. So there was also Prajapati. And so she was the second queen of King Shuddhadana. And so she adopted him and raised the Buddha. Now, as I mentioned before, that the Buddha had a half-brother named Nanda, right? So now when we speak about the life story of the Buddha, that I've already explained. So first, when the Buddha entered the womb, his mother had an extraordinary dream of a white elephant dissolving into her body. And this is what it is said, right? So that is called the deed of entering the womb. Now, just before the Buddha was born, so shortly before he was to be born, his mother Maya developed the wish to return to her homeland of Devadaha. And so while she was traveling back to Devadaha, she came to the grove of Lumbini. It's like a garden or a park. And when she arrived at this place called Lumbini, so before she arrived at her homeland, so the Mahak arrived at the site of Lumbini and gave birth to the Buddha. Now, as when we say that the Buddha was born out of his mother's right side, we say that, right? It came out from between her ribs, right? So if now this saying that she was born out of the right side of his mother is probably from an old Indian tradition. Is saying that the Brahmas came out of Brahma came out of the top of the Brahma's head, and the other caste came from the shoulders, and so forth. So I think this is basically a traditional way of speaking in India. It's just kind of a way of saying that the Kshatriya caste were important. And so it's a way of speaking about their births. But I think that actually he was probably born the way children normally are born. If she came out between her ribs, that'd be kind of strange and really quite frightening, wouldn't it? So the Buddha was born at Lumbini, is a place where later the Emperor Ashoka came, and he erected a temple and a pillar there. And this was described by the Chinese master Xuanzang, who saw it when he traveled to India. And he recorded this in his account of his travels to India. Then in 1896, some archaeologists excavated the site, and they found Ashoka's pillar underground. And when they read the inscription on the pillar, they determined that this site had been the Buddha's birthplace. So the name of the area now is something like Rumendei. That's what it's called in these days. It's probably Nepali, and I don't know it very well. It's better not to try. It's probably some language from the Tarai. Now, after the Buddha was born, the name he was given when he was a child, he wasn't originally called the Buddha, right? He was called the Buddha after he achieved Buddhahood. So when he was young, he was called Siddhartha. The reason he was called Siddhartha is that at that time, at the same time that the child Siddhartha was born, many different desired aims happened all at the same time. For example, the king found some treasure, and there were several other children born in the Shakya people. So at that time, so for that reason, all of his aims had been accomplished. So they called him the name of Siddhartha, or the accomplishment of all aims, and so called him Siddhartha. Now we have a very big question. And the question is, when was the Buddha born? When was the Buddha born? What year? What month? What day was he born on? So now the answer is you can take your choice. Forget about saying what month or what day. You can't even say what year he was born in. There are only disagreeing positions. There's not even no harmony at all among the different assertions. So it's very difficult to say definitely that the Buddha was born on a particular day. But in the next day or two, I'm going to spend an entire day speaking only about the dates of the Buddha, the date of his birth and the date that he passed into nirvana. It's very complicated, so I'm going to devote an entire day to it, and I will speak about it later. Now, in the 6th century, there was an Indian master named Gyanagupta, who traveled to China. And he translated the Abhinishkrama Sutra into Chinese. And this is the same sutra as I mentioned before, the Abhinishkrama Sutra, which was translated by an Indian master into Chinese when he had gone to Chinese. Now, what it says in this sutra, and this is a very early sutra, and so that is why I'm using it as my source. Now, before he reached the age of age, Prince Siddhartha was allowed to play. He's given a lot of freedom, and he had he just spent his time enjoying himself. So he did not need to study yet, and he only spent his time playing. Now, when he reached the age of 8, he then began his schooling. And when he began his schooling, what did he have to study? Learning to read, learning to write. And likewise, he also learned athletic skills or military skills. For example, this. Oh, I forgot to talk about this. There is the examination of the baby by the soothsayers. This is when you're looking at the astrologers. So after that, he began his education. He spent 4 years studying the education, and he spent 4 years learning, and he achieved mastery in all those areas of knowledge. So now, as I forgot to say before, in the old tradition, they would examine the face and all the different marks and signs on the baby's body, and they'd say, now in the future, what is going to happen with this child? And so they invited people who are skilled soothsayers to examine the child's face and features and body. And what they said at that time is that your son is that in the future, perhaps he's going to become a universal emperor. So universal emperor means basically at that time, means someone who would be able to gain control over all of India, a very powerful and great king. or perhaps you'll go forth as a monastic and become someone who has really great knowledge, who realizes the knowledge should become this sort of a great being. So they say either one of these two. So now King Shuddhadana thought to himself, no, if he becomes like a universal emperor, like this is what I want, this is what I'm his father, and so I think that'd be really great. Now, if he goes forth, and then that wouldn't work. He was worried about that happening. He only had one older son, right? And if that were to go off and become a monk, then he had the difficulty of no one to take over his kingdom, right? So from one perspective, he had a faith, and from another aspect, he had the worry. And so this is why he was so careful to take care of the Buddha. Now, when the Prince Siddhartha had become very learned in all the areas of knowledge and athletic skills and so forth, so they went to and all the gathered with all of the Shakyus in this part to go, and they all went to practice archery. And when they're playing with the archer, and at that time there was a bird flying in the sky. Some people say it was a crane, some say it was a goose. Whether it was a crane or a goose is hard to say. In any case, there was a large bird that was flying into the sky, and at that point, there was Devadatta, right? The one who later called the demon Devadatta would later become. But at that point, he was not yet the demon. But this was when Devadatta was young. And he saw this bird flying in the sky, and he thought, and he had been practicing archery and so that today I'm gonna show off to everyone these days. And he shot the arrow, and he shot, and it hit the bird, and the bird fell to the ground. And when the place where it fell to the ground was actually right in front of the Prince Siddhartha. So Prince Siddhartha saw the bird fall, and he took the bird in his arms, and he started to rub it. And he pulled out the arrow that had struck the bird, and he treated the wound with honey and so forth. And while he was treating, then Devadatta sent a person, he said, to say, I shot a bird with an arrow, and he fell by you. So please give me back that bird. It's it wouldn't be right for you to keep it, Devadatta said. And so the Prince Siddhartha sent the person back to give him the message. If this bird dies, then I'll give it to you, of course. But if it does not, I won't give it to you, he said. And we said this, then Devadatta sent the person back again. And the person said, whether it dies or not, you have to give it to me. You absolutely have to give it to me. And the reason is that I'm the one who shot it first, right? I'm the one who shot it first, and it's because of my arrow that it fell to the ground. So how can you keep it? Why won't you give it back to me? You absolutely have to give it back to me, he said. And when he said that, then Siddhartha said, in the past, I've already made an aspiration to protect all sentient beings. And because I've made that prayer, and so this bird is one of all sentient beings, and so I absolutely have to protect it. He said, I'm going to protect it. So Devadatta and Siddhartha then got an argument over the bird. And in the end, all the Shakya elders had to convene a meeting and to think, what can we do about this? What should we do about the situation, they asked. So they had the meeting and they had to resolve the dispute. So for that reason, so the disputes between Devadatta and Siddhartha continued for the entire life. And the first event in that disagreement began with that because of the killing of the bird. So that's the event that caused a lifelong rivalry. And so from then on, Devadatta only just caused problems for the Buddha, right? Now, one time, King Shuddhadana went out, taking many people with him. He was going out to survey the fields because the Shakyas were primarily farmers, right? So he primarily, as the king of the Shakyas, he wanted to go to take a look at the crops in the fields. And he also took the Prince Siddhartha with him. And he saw how the animals were suffering in the fields, and how he saw the stronger animals would eat the weaker ones. He saw how all of the farmers in the fields were always bent over and working extremely hard. It's like they're all just seeing how hard they're sweating. And so he felt a great world weariness at this point, very despondent. And he was very unhappy to see this. And so instead of staying with a group of people and watching the festival, the shows, he withdrew from the crowds. He went sat under a tree, and he sat underneath that, and he did underneath the tree, and he did some meditation. So the Buddha himself, from the time he was very young, enjoyed doing meditation. Just naturally, instinctively, he enjoyed doing meditation. So when he sat underneath this tree and did meditation, now the meditation he did at that point was actually he achieved the first level, the first jhana. That's what it said. He achieved the level, the first jhana. This is because of the previous births. It's not like you sat down and achieved the level of the first jhana. It wouldn't immediately happen. But what it says in the sutras is that at that time, he felt despondent. He sat underneath the trees, and when he sat there, he achieved the level of the first jhana, it said. Now, as he grew older and older, then when the Prince Siddhartha got to the age of 16, King Shuddhadana recognized Prince Siddhartha as the crown prince. He gave him this position of being the crown prince. And he had him marry the Shakya princess Yashodhara. So this is the picture of him marrying Yashodhara. Now he and Yashodhara had one son, and his name was Rahula. Now also one time, when all the Shakya people gathered, Prince Siddhartha displayed his athletic prowess. So he showed his martial arts, kind of like the kung fu. He had been spending time studying martial arts from the time he was young, and so when all the Shakyas got together, he displayed his prowess, and he amazed all of the Shakyas with his display of his skills. Now, the time when there are different positions as to when this happened. Some people say that before he got married, he displayed his athletic prowess, and some say that it was after he had gotten married. Now, this is primarily a difference between the scriptures of the northern tradition and the southern tradition. According to the northern tradition, it says that before he got married, in order to have a competition to see who would become Yashodhara's husband, they had this athletic competition. And so there's a little bit of difference over that. In any case, for the Kshatriya class, it's very important to show off their martial skills, because the people in the Kshatriya class have to go off to war, right? So in the old days, so if you're going to go to war, you had to have martial skills. It's not like these days where it's not like today where the our enemy may be far away, kilometers away, and just shoot them like that and kill them, right? You had to go fight hand to hand, and so you had to have your own strength and skills to practice. And so for that reason, Kshatriyas considered studying martial skills very important. In particular, the Shakas were very skilled in archery. And in that time, there was no one who could rival the Shakyas in their skills in archery. So basically, in India, at that time, the Shakyas were the most skilled in archery. And so basically, so at that time, the Buddha Shakyamuni showed off his skills, particularly in archery, and became very well known for this. Now, after he got married, he left 10 years later. He decided to leave the palace and to wander as a mendicant or to go to practice the Dharma. Now, the reason why he decided to do this was the main. And so, like as it says in our praise of the Buddha's deeds, or it says showing world weariness at the gates of the city. So when he left so on occasions when he went out from the city, he saw an old man, an ill man, the corpse of a person, and a monk. And when he saw them, then he developed a great desire to go forth. He thought, I have to go forth. There's no point to human life. Human life is important, and he thought. So he had this really strong feeling for this in his heart, and so for that he just completely decided he was going to go forth. In any case, he was still young when he decided to go forth, but his parents, his actual mother was not there, but his father, the king, and Prajapati wanted him to continue holding power as the king. But he gave up on that. I mean, he still already had a wife and a son, but he also gave them up, and he left the city of Kapilavastu. Now, the way he left is that one way of explaining is that in the middle of the night, probably like around 1 or 2 in the morning, right? So he had a horse named Kantaka. This horse whom he really liked, and the horse's name was called Kantaka. And he rode the horse. So he left the horse, and he went with his charioteer Chana, and with those two, he left Kapilavastu without anyone knowing. So at that time, how old was he? Now there are also many different positions. Some people say that he was 31. Some people say 29. So there are differences. There are 3 different positions. But 29 is the age that most people accept in general these days. So at the age of 29, he decided to go forth and become a monk. And in the night, he fled the palace. He had no choice but to flee. If he had said this to the king would have let him, right? And this Prince Siddhartha's act or deed of fleeing the palace was taken as example, but it was considered important by many later practitioners. They took it as an example, and they thought that going forth means like you have to flee the house like Prince Siddhartha. It's not they don't think about whether they have renunciation with the Buddha, but they think, oh, we have to go forth like the Buddha Shakyamuni did. We have to leave the home. And so then people take this as an example and then just leave the house all of a sudden. So after the prince had left the house, he then cut his hair and went forth. He put on the robes of a mendicant, and he practiced what I spoke yesterday, the wandering practice of wandering. So I mentioned about the four. As I mentioned, the four stages of life. The last of them is called going forth. It's called samyasin, wandering practitioner. So he went straight from living in the home to being a wandering practitioner, and he skipped the phase of living in the forest. He just went straight to become a wandering practitioner. Now, at that time, King Shuddhodana, the next morning, learned that Prince Siddhartha wasn't there, and he immediately sent a messenger to tell Prince Siddhartha to tell him to come back, but that didn't do any good. And they sent the messenger back, and he continued. He had completely made his decision entirely, and he wasn't going back. So then, where did he go? He went to Magadha. Now, the reason why he went to Magadha is that there were many excellent Dharma practitioners, many great Dharma practitioners. And so for that reason, he went to Magadha. Now, while he was on his way to Magadha, he went alone. He wasn't with anyone else. And when he went to the capital of Magadha, which is Rajgir. And when he went begging for alms in Rajgir, the king of Magadha, King Bimbisara, saw him and recognized him. I'm not getting this wrong, am I? I hope I'm not getting this wrong. So King Bimbisara saw him. And when he saw him, Bimbisara said to Prince Siddhartha, he gave him advice. You shouldn't think about going forth and become a monk. You should go back and listen to your father, he said. You have to become a king, he said. He gave him some advice about this. He gave him this advice, but Prince Siddhartha would not accept it. He didn't accept it. I think it was King Bimbisara who said, if I'm wrong, I will let you know. I will change this tomorrow. In any case, he didn't accept. Later, where Prince Siddhartha went is that there was a famous Dharma practitioner in Magadha whose name was Aladaka Lama. So he went to Aladaka Lama. So Alada wasn't just an ordinary Dharma practitioner. He practiced a samadhi, and he had achieved a very high level of samadhi. So the level that he got to is what we talk about. We talk about the four jhanas and the four formless, and so he got to the samadhi. He was a person who developed the samadhi of the third formless level of nothingness. And so what he taught the Prince Siddhartha was the technique of the samadhi of nothingness. Now, samadhi was very easy for Prince Siddhartha. And when he learned this, and so when he mastered the samadhi, he was not satisfied with it. He thought to himself, I can't achieve realize the nature from that. And so he went to look for another teacher. And who was that other teacher? Because Uddaka Ramaputra. So he went to Uddaka Ramaputra and he continued to practice. Now, Uddaka had developed an even higher level of meditation. So the previous one had achieved the level of nothingness. So Uddaka had an even more amazing samadhi called the samadhi of neither existence or non-existence. And so this is the highest of the four formless realms, the highest type of samadhi, the samadhi of neither existence nor non-existence. And so he had achieved that. And so his life was very, very peaceful. So the Siddhartha achieved it. He had an extremely peaceful mind, even more peaceful than mine before. He kind of sounded like he felt like the his mind and the unchanging nature had kind of mixed in like into one flavor, like pouring water into water. I don't know whether it actually achieved one flavor, but it felt like it achieved one flavor. But Prince Siddhartha saw that there was a problem there. And the problem was that when he was meditating on samadhi, then his mind was extremely peaceful. But when he arose from the meditation, his mind moved exactly as it before. There many thoughts occurred. And so for this reason, that this is just his mind becoming peaceful to the strength of samadhi, but it wasn't actual related to the nature of things. So training in samadhi does affect the mind. It does change the mind, but the nature of things has to come through realizing nature, that through reasonings. It has to come through the distinct, individually distinctive awareness. You can't just achieve liberation from samadhi alone. So even though he'd achieved that level of samadhi, he still had not fulfilled his aim of achieving liberation and liberating himself from samsara and realizing the nature of things. So he left. And so where did he go? So he was not satisfied. The two great lamas, such great lamas, had not been able to fulfill his wishes. So it's like he had no place to go. So where did he go? So he went into the forest. He went into the forest and he practiced alone. So he practiced all alone, thinking to himself, I need to find a way to realize the nature. And he went alone and he decided to go alone to the forest to practice meditation. And the forest that he went to was a forest near the so this is on the banks of the Naranjana River. There's Uruvela forest. So this is a Naranjana. So it's like on the side. So there's a river and there was the forest. And so when he got there and he thought to himself, this is a very nice place to do practice. And so this is where he began to practice austerities. And he really went through a lot of austerities. It's austerities that, we can hardly conceive of the austerities that he did. Now, but this is a sort of a non-Buddhist way of practicing. And the way of practicing the asceticism, to give an example, I'm going to give two examples of this. The first is to stop the movement of breath and rest with the mind one pointedly. So stopping the movement of breath means that normally when we breathe through our mouth and nose, right? Either through our mouth or through our nostrils, right? When we breathe either through the nose or the mouth, right? But he stopped the moment of breath and rested with his mind one pointedly. What he did, this is what's similar to what we call in mantra is binding the prana. So what you have to do is you have to stop all the breath from moving so that you aren't breathing out at all. You have to completely stop it. And when you stopped it entirely, what happened is all the air came in through his ears. Now, I've never experienced this, but this is what they say. The air would come in through his ears, it said. So it's like as if, he couldn't breathe through his mouth and nose. So in the end, he had to breathing through his ears. And in the end, he even managed to stop the breath through his ears. And when you stop the movement of all the breath and the winds, when you don't breathe, you die, right? But while suffering from such a medicine, he still was really diligent in trying to establish the firm foundness. He needed to have firm mindfulness. He had to cause the suffering of the body, but still within that, keep his mindfulness, keep his mind one-pointed and have a good firm foundation of mindfulness. And so what happened is that, so at the same time, and so he had to stop the breath, cause hardship for his body, and make sure that hardship of the body did not affect his mind from resting one-pointedly. And so So basically, he did this several times. If we say this, and if we don't say it respectfully, he was on the point of dying several times. That was one of his austerities that he practiced. Now, another way that he practiced, to give an example, was the austerity of food, which means not eating any food at all, not even any type of food at all. And so what he first did is, he decreased the amount of food that he was eating until he completely stopped eating or drinking at all. And so because he had stopped eating, had been fasting for so long, his body changed. His limbs became very, very thin, and all his skin started to hang. All the hair started falling out of his head. All the hair fell out of his head, and he's got an extreme physical suffering. I'll mention this later. There was the story of the farmer's daughter who gave him yogurt. Some said it was milk, some say it was kheer. But what she offered it to him, what it wrote there is what it says in the sutra. It said it was and so at that time said that she thought it was the tree god, and when she saw him, because basically at that time she only saw the person. She didn't really see the person. She just looked kind of like it blended into the tree so perfectly that she thought that he was a tree god. And so he went through such extreme asceticism and austerities as that. And as he spent the time alone practicing austerities in the forest, what happened? When he was doing all the austerities, and he remembers the things that had happened in his life. You'll think of different things, right? For example, think about going home and doing as I did before. Think I could go back and live a luxurious life I did before. Maybe it's better. What I'm doing is pointless. So it's possible he would have had that sort of thought. It's possible that he might have had that sort of deceptive thought. And it's also possible that he'd have a doubt. Now, by doing such austerities, am I going to possibly achieve liberation? And he was in the middle of a unpopulated forest. What there are birds, there are various beasts of prey, and they can go all around at will. They go back and forth. And in particular, in the middle of the night, there are all sorts of birds and beasts who are giving their calls. And whoever you are, you're going to get afraid sometimes, right? If you have to sit in the middle of a forest where there's no one around. He had all sorts of different thoughts and all these different fears. And so he took them as like a representative of the evil Mara. When we talk about a demon, a Mara, doesn't mean someone like with big fangs and a really scary person. That's not necessarily what's meant. At that point, a Mara, if we think about, when we talk the Mara, the demon is like a personification. But actually, that point is that the Prince Siddhartha at that point was having a lot of difficulties. And he was suffering from the asceticism. He was his body was suffering. He could have all sorts of different thoughts. He could have all sorts of fears. And so he explained these all as being like Maras or demons. In any case, all these different appearances and all these fears occur. And it's like, and so like they harassed him for not just for a single day, but for a long time. They just give him a hard time for many years. But he says the Maras didn't get even a single opportunity. He said, I won't give them a chance. He was going to keep practicing. And he just continued to practice. And the Maras were not able to get any chance. So basically, Prince Siddhartha was all as alone. He was completely solid. And he experienced such hardships as no one had ever experienced before. And not only did he face up to this, but he also, not just to facing up, that he also had to keep his mindfulness one pointedly. If you just are feeling suffering, you just sort of put up with it, that's okay. But then he had an aim. There's a reason for doing austerities, and what is the reason for doing the austerities? It's to achieve is to understand the nature of things. It wasn't just to do austerities; it was to realize the nature of things. And so, for that reason, from the next aspect, he had a lot of difficulty in the mind. At the same time, he had to really maintain his mindfulness. So he tried in many different ways. He's in ways that just we can't get our minds around. He did these as he put all the work in, but he wasn't able to achieve the view or the state that transcended the world, the state, whether you call it the name of Buddhahood or Arhatship, the state that he wanted to achieve, the state and the view and level that he wanted to achieve, he did not achieve, even though he had done so much difficulty. So how is that achieved? How can you achieve a transcendent view or a transcendent state? How do you achieve that? And so that's what I'll speak about tomorrow. I won't speak about it tomorrow. Okay. So now we will have the closing prayers.
Jai